Right, let's jump straight into this. Today, we're doing a really deep and honestly kind of provocative explainer on the true value of your life. We're going to completely challenge everything you think you know about how society measures human worth. Drawing from a fascinating lecture by Ustadh Nouman Ali Khan, we're unpacking the real concepts behind wealth, success, and what we're actually worth as humans. So let's just dive right in.
So let me ask you directly, what is your actual worth? Like, how do you even measure it? In today's world, the answer is honestly pretty terrifying. Think about it. If you look up a famous person on Wikipedia, their entire existence, their whole life experience, it all just gets boiled down to one single metric, their net worth in millions of dollars. And on social media? Well, your worth is literally just your follower count. If you have millions of followers, wow, you are incredibly valuable. But if you have, say, 13 followers, society kind of pretends you barely even exist.
And, that really highlights the sheer absurdity of it all. On one side, we have this incredibly complex, multi-layered living human soul, and on the other, dead metrics. We've somehow started measuring the value of a living, breathing person using completely dead, non-living things, like dollars sitting in a bank account or a virtual follower count on the internet. Your value doesn't even come from you anymore. It's being assigned to you by lifeless objects. It's wild.
To really put into perspective just how warped our value systems have become, just think about the number 26 million. I mean, who would have thought maybe a couple of decades ago that someone whose entire thing is just doing remixes of meowing cats on the internet could suddenly amass 26 million followers and be considered a highly valuable member of society? We're literally willing to assign massive importance to almost anything, just as long as it comes with a big, giant number attached to it.
But here's where it gets way more dangerous. The source material refers to this as the capitalist trap. The speaker points out this mind-blowing fact: if you open up a medical manual of mental disorders, you're really not going to find diagnosis for the obsessive hoarding of money. Unless, of course, you're losing it. But honestly, endlessly acquiring wealth without any sort of higher purpose actually ticks all the boxes for a behavioral addiction. It's a trap where accumulating stuff just becomes the whole point, and that is profoundly destructive, both psychologically and spiritually.
Which brings us to Section 1, the false ascetic misconception. Completely rejecting the material world.
So feeling completely disgusted by all this crazy materialism, a lot of religious folks actually make a huge mistake and swing the pendulum entirely in the opposite direction. Historically, the idea that wealth is a curse worked out great for kings and empires who wanted all the wealth for themselves. But in Islamic discourse, as the speaker notes, this develops into what we can call the Dunya is nothing disorder. Dunya meaning our material, physical world. People take phrases out of context, like the world being worth less than a mosquito's wing, and they develop this really dangerous psychological complex. They genuinely start to believe that this world is totally worthless, that striving for success is inherently sinful, and that poverty is somehow your guaranteed VIP ticket to heaven. It's a total rejection of the worldly life.
Let's move on to Section 2, the true Islamic balance, the middle path of purpose.
Now, the lecture shatters this poverty misconception with a really powerful point. Islam is not about praising poverty like Catholic-style asceticism. The speaker points out a profound irony here. Picture millions of pilgrims performing tawaf, circling the Kaaba in Mecca. They're wearing these simple white cloths that literally symbolize death. But what is the prayer they are repeating the absolute most during this? Our Lord, give us the best in this dunya, in this world, and the best in the hereafter. Think about that. They are specifically asking for the absolute best right here in the physical world alongside the afterlife.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 3, resources for higher purposes, the builders of the Quran.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that wealth itself is never actually condemned. In fact, it's actively encouraged, but only when it's utilized as a powerful tool, a resource for a higher purpose. The Quran actually calls for using wealth to establish justice and help humanity. The speaker brings up the brilliant example of the great leader Dhul-Qarnayn. God gave him unbelievable resources and power. Did he run away from it like some ascetic hermit? Absolutely not. He actively gathered those immense resources, multiplied his capabilities, and channeled all of it into establishing global justice. He even built a massive protective wall against the corrupt tribes of Ya'juj and Ma'juj.
And to expand that mission of justice, Dhul-Qarnayn literally traveled to the most murky, challenging, difficult territories on Earth. The speaker actually uses a pretty funny analogy here, comparing these swampy, muddy places to Orlando right before they built Disney World. I mean, why would anyone go there? Definitely not to just hang out with the alligators, right? He went there to actively expand his empire of justice. He used his massive resources to protect the vulnerable, even in the most remote, unpleasant corners of the world.
Then, the lecture looks at the incredible wealth of Prophet Sulaiman. Now, the source clears up a really common myth here, the idea that Sulaiman supposedly got angry and slaughtered his beautiful horses because they made him miss a prayer. Actually, Islam strictly forbids animal cruelty. What really happened was that to create and sustain the noble cavalry he was commanded to build, Sulaiman had to construct a massive, entirely ethical economic system. We're talking stables, blacksmiths, agricultural land, expert trainers, the whole shebang. That required gigantic financial investments. His wealth was absolutely necessary to build strength and provide protection.
Okay, moving to Section 4, the radioactive power of wealth. Handle with profound care.
We've reached the climax metaphor of this explainer, and it perfectly reconciles the extreme danger of the material world with the absolute necessity of having worldly resources. Imagine snake venom. On one hand, it's a deadly poison that can easily destroy you. But, on the other hand, if you handle it correctly, that exact same venom is the vital ingredient used to create a powerful, life-saving antidote. Well, wealth works exactly the same way. You shouldn't blindly hate it. You need to learn how to handle it so you can extract its value to heal the world.
Or, look at it this way. Wealth is literally like radioactive material. You don't just run away from it in blind fear, completely ignoring its potential, right? Sure, if you treat it carelessly, it is a highly destructive hazard. But if you handle it with extreme caution and a clear sense of purpose, it becomes a massive energy source that can power entire civilizations and light up whole cities. Wealth demands profound respect and a higher, noble purpose.
And that is exactly why purpose is so critical. The speaker notes that if you don't have this higher, constructive purpose, your worldview just starts to shrink. It catastrophically shrinks down to nothing but your own ego. You start thinking only about yourself, your own petty little problems. Your own passions and selfish desires literally become your God. And eventually you just become that person we talked about at the beginning, someone whose entire value is measured by nothing but dead metrics and empty accumulation.
So, in its true tradition, wealth is absolutely not a curse, and it's definitely not the end goal either. It is a profound radioactive power. Your resources, your time, your talents, that is your power. So, the ultimate question is, what are you building with yours? It's time to stop running from ambition. Find that higher purpose, harness your resources, and leave a truly meaningful legacy behind. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.
So it's 2 o'clock in the morning. The harsh blue light of your phone is just burning into your retinas.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Illuminating this dark room, and you are just deep, I mean deep, in the doom scroll.
It's basically a modern pastime at this point.
It really is. But then, the algorithm serves you something specific, and suddenly you find yourself on the Wikipedia page of some, 22-year-old tech founder.
Right, or maybe you're just looking at a former classmate's social media profile.
Yeah, exactly. And your eyes just lock onto their follow account or her estimated net worth. And in that quiet, solitary moment, as your thumb is just hovering over the glass, this genuinely uncomfortable question creeps into your mind.
The big one.
The big one. Where does your actual value come from? What makes you, sitting there on your couch in the middle of the night, actually worth anything?
I mean, it is the defining silent anxiety of our era.
It really is.
We are constantly quantifying human existence, and we do it so seamlessly that we rarely even pause to notice the psychological self-harm involved.
Yeah, the self-harm. Because you look at a digit on a screen.
Exactly. A net worth, a follower count, a job title, and you subconsciously weigh the totality of your soul against it.
Wow. Weighing your soul against a digit.
Right. It is an immediate, involuntary calculation of human worth.
Well, today we are tearing into the mechanics of that calculation. Welcome to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and joined, as always, by our resident expert. And today we are unpacking a really fascinating lecture by Nouman Ali Khan titled The True Value of Human Life.
But to be clear up front, we're looking at this through a very specific lens today.
Yeah, we are. We're taking the theological framework presented in his discussion, and we're extracting the hard, practical, neurobiological, and psychological tools embedded within these Islamic and biblical traditions.
Because the goal here is to isolate the antidote to modern stress, to understand that crushing baseline anxiety we all feel.
Right, and to dismantle that creeping feeling of insignificance that just seems to be the background noise of modern life.
And doing that requires us to view these ancient texts not merely as, historical doctrine, but as incredibly advanced diagnostic manuals on human psychology.
Diagnostic manuals, I like that.
Yeah, because the frameworks discussed in this lecture, they provide a profound lens for analyzing the mental health crisis we're currently navigating. It demands we examine our daily behaviors, from how we interact with our bank accounts to how we manage our stress.
And ask whether we are operating under fundamental delusions about what we are and what we're supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
So to navigate this, we're going to look at 3 acute things. First, the psychology of wealth. Second, the hidden dangers of modern self-care and, like, the whole retreat culture.
That one's going to step on some toes.
Oh, absolutely. And finally, how taking on terrifying massive responsibilities might actually be the counterintuitive cure for your daily anxiety. But before we get into the psychopathology of money, I need to ask you, the listener, to do something a little difficult.
Just for the next hour.
Right. Wherever you are right now, driving, cooking, working out, try to intentionally put down your mental baggage. Take whatever assumptions you hold about ambition, about wealth, about what it means to be successful, and just set them aside.
Give yourself permission to view your life, your career, and your anxieties through a radically different, massively expanded horizon.
Okay, so let's begin with that first major concept. The way modern society measures human value. You mentioned this earlier, but there's a terrifying example presented in the lecture about how we evaluate people today.
Oh, the Wikipedia example. It's so stark.
Yeah.
You look up a public figure, and what is the most prominent metric?
It's estimated net worth. Right there on the sidebar.
Right there at the top of the page. A numerical value assigned to a human being. Or, in the social currency realm, we look at influence. Society looks at a creator and says, well, they have 26 million followers. This person is highly valuable.
Right. They matter.
They matter. But then they look at someone with 400 followers
Yeah.
and deem them, marginally valuable. And someone with 13 followers.
Society barely registers them as a participant in reality. It's brutal.
It is. And the underlying mechanism there is incredibly stark when you really pull it apart. We are taking the inherent, undeniable, intrinsic value of a living, breathing human being.
And we are outsourcing it to something entirely inanimate.
Exactly. We are telling ourselves that worth doesn't originate from character or the soul or just inherent humanity. We are deriving our right to exist from a dead currency.
A dead currency, wow. And it could be fiat currency, social currency of likes, or even the institutional currency of an Ivy League degree, right?
Yes. You are a biological, conscious entity, and you're begging for validation from abstract concepts that do not have a pulse.
That is such a wild way to frame it. But when you attach a living soul to a dead metric, you create this profound structural psychological vulnerability.
How so?
Because if your value is entirely dependent on an external inanimate object, you are placing yourself in a perpetual state of precariousness. Like, if the market crashes, do you suddenly lose 20% of your humanity?
Right. If the algorithm shifts and your engagement drops by half, does your soul shrink proportionately?
It's a recipe for chronic, low-grade terror. Because you have literally given control of your self-worth to volatile, indifferent systems.
And this brings up a massive paradox in how modern psychology handles this. The lecture points this out regarding the DSM.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right, the clinical Bible of psychology. So the clinical literature goes into exhaustive, granular detail about the psychological fallout of losing money.
Oh, absolutely. We have mountains of data on how financial ruin leads to profound clinical depression.
Acute anxiety, suicidal ideation. But the DSM has historically possessed this glaring blind spot. It completely ignores the psychological disorder of accumulating money.
Wait, really? It just doesn't address it?
It reveals the cultural bias of the society that produced the manual. I mean, think about it. In a hyper-capitalist framework, the relentless accumulation of wealth is the organizing principle of the society.
It's the goal. It's the American dream, or whatever version of it exists globally.
Exactly. It is the ultimate metric of success. So, to classify the very engine of the culture as a mental illness
would be a massive systemic contradiction.
Right. But when you look at recent neurobiological studies, you start seeing evidence of a very real money psychopathology. The obsession with accumulating wealth maps perfectly onto the clinical criteria for a behavioral addiction.
Okay, so it mirrors something like gambling or substance abuse.
Completely. You build a tolerance. You experience withdrawal symptoms when the accumulation stops. Your entire central nervous system becomes oriented around acquiring the next hit.
And the most insidious part is that the finish line just keeps moving.
Yeah.
You never actually arrive at a state of satiety, right?
Never. Biologically, this is because behavioral addiction rewires the brain's reward circuitry. The dopamine spike doesn't come from the static state of having the money.
Oh, that makes sense. It's the chase.
Yes, the dopamine is released during the anticipation and the friction of acquiring more. This means the individual is trapped on a hedonic treadmill.
So you convince yourself that, like, $1 million in liquid assets will make you feel safe.
But once you achieve it, your baseline neurochemistry adjusts. Suddenly, the million feels inadequate, and only 10 million will silence the anxiety. It is an endless, agonizing cycle of craving.
And what's wild is that the cross-tradition wisdom from these ancient texts has been warning us about this specific neurobiological trap for millennia.
The lecture goes incredibly deep into those texts, and the consistency is staggering.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because there's a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad states that every community, every ummah has its specific fitna.
Right, it's trial. It's ultimate temptation that will test their structural integrity.
And the fitna of his ummah is explicitly identified as wealth.
Not poverty, not starvation, but wealth.
The surplus of resources is the ultimate stress test on the human heart.
And that is a crucial diagnostic distinction. The trial isn't the deprivation of resources, it's the abundance of them, and specifically how that abundance infects the human operating system when it becomes the primary objective.
But it's not just the Islamic tradition. The lecture brings in the biblical perspective too, quoting the prophet Isaiah, and this blew my mind. He pronounces doom on those who, quote, add house to house and join field to field until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land.
That verse feels like it was written yesterday.
I know. It is a perfect psychological profile of, like, a modern billionaire buying up adjacent properties in a zip code just to create an empty buffer zone around themselves.
And then Ecclesiastes notes that whoever loves money never has enough, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income.
And Jesus, or Isa, reinforces this by stating, you literally cannot serve both God and wealth. You cannot have two masters. It's a fundamental flaw in the human architecture when exposed to unchecked surplus.
Look closely at the psychological accuracy of that Isaiah quote, though. Until there is no more room and you are made to dwell alone. Accumulation as a pathology is profoundly isolating.
Because it naturally severs human connection.
Yes. When your primary lens on reality is viewing everything as an asset to be acquired, you inevitably begin viewing human beings either as assets to leverage
or obstacles to eliminate. Wow.
Exactly. The addiction to inanimate objects inherently alienates you from animate life. You end up alone in your massive estate, surrounded by dead things, utterly alienated from the human experience.
Okay, I hear all of this, but I have to push back hard here.
Let's go for it.
Because I know exactly what you, the listener, might be thinking right now, especially if you are currently grinding at a job you don't particularly like. Just keep your head above water.
Sure.
It is incredibly easy to sit in a studio and philosophize about the sickness of wealth and the isolation of billionaires. But we live in a reality where, like, a carton of eggs costs twice what it did 3 years ago.
That's true.
Inflation is eroding purchasing power in real time. Medical emergencies can bankrupt a family in a week. When society aggressively penalizes you for not hoarding, when the cost of living is a constantly moving target, isn't it just basic, rational human nature to want security?
I completely understand that reaction.
Like, society forces us to care about our bank accounts and credit scores to survive. So isn't labeling this an addiction incredibly dismissive of people who are just trying to build a financial moat around their family to keep the wolves at bay? You can't just separate survival hoarding from pathological hoarding when survival itself requires hoarding.
That is the exact friction point, and it's a necessary confrontation. But we have to draw a very sharp clinical line here between the biological imperative for security and the psychopathology of accumulation.
Okay, where's the line?
The framework we are discussing is absolutely not condemning survival. It's not condemning providing for your family, securing healthcare, or building a stable, insulated life. What it is diagnosing is the illness of accumulation as an end goal in itself.
An end goal in itself?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is diagnosing the moment the tool of money mutates into the master of your consciousness.
But how do you clinically identify that moment? Because in our system, enough is a moving target. Where's the line between wanting to ensure my kids can go to college and falling into the pathology of Isaiah?
Let's look at it through the lens of the autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
When you secure food, shelter, and basic stability, your nervous system should downregulate. You feel safe. The sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response, turns off, and you enter a state of rest and digest.
That's healthy, functional survival.
Right. But money psychopathology is defined by the fact that the acquisition of wealth never turns off the stress response. In fact, the larger the hoard gets, the more the stress response amplifies.
Oh, wow. So you actually get more stress the richer you get?
Yes, you become paranoid. Perpetually terrified of losing the accumulated assets.
Yeah.
You're no longer gathering resources to live, you are living to serve the resources.
And the lecture points out that the Quran doesn't prohibit saving money or engaging in commerce, right?
It's not at all. It condemns a person living in a microscopic psychological world where hoarding is the terminal purpose of their existence. So the audit for the listener is this.
Yeah, listener, pay attention to this.
How much of your daily, grinding, chest-tightening stress is actually tied to keeping the lights on? And how much is tied to a moving artificial metric that society told you defines your status?
Man, that is a brutal audit. Like, are you having a panic attack because you literally cannot buy groceries this week? Or are you having a panic attack because your coworker got a title promotion on LinkedIn and suddenly you feel this deep, visceral sense of inadequacy?
Exactly. Because the title is an abstract concept. It's a ghost. But your body is reacting as if a tiger just walked into the room.
You are letting a ghost dictate your cortisol levels.
Precisely. And once you realize you've been letting ghosts regulate your nervous system, the immediate reaction for many people is a profound overcorrection.
Which brings us to the second major dynamic we need to explore today, the urge to just check out.
The retreat.
Right, because if the material world is a sickness, then protecting my peace means rejecting it completely. And the lecture dives into the history of this reaction, noting how this concept of extreme asceticism has manifested historically.
There's a fascinating look at the medieval European concept of wealth here.
The idea that wealth is inherently a curse on the soul.
Exactly. This incredibly convenient, weaponized theology that was pushed onto the working class.
Yeah, the prevailing narrative fed to the masses was basically, wealth is a terrible, corrupting burden. It'll rot your soul and keep you out of heaven, so don't you worry your little peasant head about it.
Right. Give your surplus to the church or give it to the divinely appointed monarch.
Let the ruling class bear the heavy, terrible burden of being filthy rich while you stay poor, humble, and pure. I mean, it was a theological masterclass in economic subjugation.
It is a brilliant example of how theology can be manipulated to maintain rigid social hierarchies. By framing poverty as piety, the ruling institutions completely neutralize the ambition and upward mobility of the working class.
They weaponize the fear of the material world to consolidate their own power.
But Nouman Ali Khan doesn't just critique medieval European history. He turns a very sharp, critical eye inward, addressing a dangerous extreme that has developed within Islamic discourse as well.
Yeah, he talks about this unnatural, paralyzing terror of Hubbud Dunya.
Which translates to the love of the world.
Right. And he notes how certain texts are stripped of their context and misinterpreted to fuel a kind of spiritual paralysis. People read a verse stating, the life of this world is merely play and amusement. Or they hear a hadith saying the world isn't worth the wing of a mosquito and their ambition just short circuits.
They fall into an extreme cognitive distortion. The lecture identifies this beautifully by outlining two distinct mental disorders regarding our relationship with the material world.
Okay, let's break these down.
Disorder number one is materialism. Dunya is everything.
The physical world, the wealth, the status, it's the only reality that matters.
Right, and we just diagnose that as the psychopathology of money. But disorder number two is extreme asceticism. Dunya is nothing.
Dunya is nothing.
The world has zero value, therefore engaging with it is inherently sinful or pointless.
And the argument presented is that both of these extremes are fundamentally flawed and mentally destructive.
They are both pathologies because they both represent an inability to engage with reality in a functional, purposeful manner. If dunya is nothing, if the world is completely worthless, then your presence in it is meaningless.
It breeds a profound, debilitating nihilism.
Wrapped in the aesthetic of spirituality, it's a refusal to participate in the mechanism of life.
And the lecture brings receipts to prove that the dunya is nothing.
Yeah.
Mindset is structurally incorrect within the faith itself. Like, think about the central prayer during Tawaf.
This is a great example.
When millions of Muslims are circling the Kaaba at the absolute physical center of their spiritual universe, what are they reciting? Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana. They are asking for good in this world and good in the hereafter.
Right. You don't walk around the holiest site on earth begging for good in a world that you genuinely believe is worth less than a mosquito's wing. It makes no theological sense.
Exactly. And furthermore, consider the rulings around Hajj itself. The pilgrimage is the absolute peak of spiritual devotion, an intense period of detachment. Yet the Quran explicitly permits commerce during Hajj.
It states there is no sin in seeking the bounty of your Lord during the pilgrimage.
If the material world was inherently toxic, commerce during the most sacred ritual of a person's life would be strictly, unconditionally forbidden, right?
Absolutely. And there's an even more striking piece of evidence provided. It looks at the promise God made to the people of the book, the Jews and Christians. The Quran says that if they had truly upheld the Torah and the gospel, they would have been showered with provisions from above them and from beneath their feet.
And the lecture interprets this in a deeply practical geological sense.
Yes, it doesn't mean magical gold coins falling from the clouds. It means the earth would yield its latent resources. It means uranium, lithium, iron, steel, massive crop yields.
So, if adhering to divine law leads to a massive boom in lithium extraction and agricultural surplus, then material abundance is clearly not a punishment.
No. The operating system of the religion is not built on a foundation of suffering or absolute deprivation.
Which brings us to the core psychological metaphor of the entire discussion. And honestly, this is a masterful synthesis of these opposing ideas. The lecture compares the dunya, the material world, wealth, power, corporate influence, to radioactive material.
Or, alternatively, to snake venom.
Let's explore the mechanics of that because it perfectly visualizes the tension we're talking about.
So consider radioactive material like uranium. Is it dangerous? Unbelievably so. It can destroy your cellular structure, cause horrific sickness, and obliterate entire cities if weaponized.
A primitive fear-based perspective would say, never touch it, bury it. It is pure evil.
But an advanced, educated perspective recognizes that if you understand its properties, if you build the proper lead-lined containment protocols, if you regulate the temperature and handle it with extreme respect, that exact same radioactive material can generate enough power to light up a metropolis.
It can power diagnostic medical equipment that saves millions of lives.
Exactly. And the snake venom works the exact same way. The venom is biologically designed to kill you. It is lethal. But if you capture the snake and you carefully, methodically milk the venom, you use it in a lab to synthesize the antivenom.
You extract the cure from the poison itself.
The argument here is that extreme asceticism, the Dunya is nothing mindset, is the equivalent of discovering there are venomous snakes in the forest and deciding to lock yourself in a sterile panic room for the rest of your life.
I mean, yes, you guarantee you won't get bitten.
But you also completely abdicate your responsibility to help anyone else who has been bitten. You fail to create the antivenom.
Okay, I understand the metaphor. But I am going to challenge this again because this goes against a massive cultural current right now.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Think about the modern mental health movement. We have this huge cultural trend centered entirely around protecting your peace.
Right.
It's the era of quiet quitting, setting rigid boundaries, deleting your social media apps, resigning from the toxic corporate job, and fantasizing about buying a little cabin in the woods where you just bake sourdough bread and ignore the geopolitical news cycle.
The cabin in the woods fantasy.
And honestly, that sounds incredible. If the corporate world or the political sphere is a radioactive, venomous snake pit, isn't retreating to the cabin the absolute healthiest thing I can do for my nervous system? Like modern therapy tells me to prioritize my mental health above all else. I am avoiding the radiation. Why is that bad?
It is a deeply seductive fantasy. And let's be clear, in the short term, a retreat might be medically necessary to heal from severe burnout or trauma.
Okay, so you're not against boundaries.
No, sometimes you need to step out of the radiation zone to let your cells recover. But the lecture is offering a profound critique of this mindset when it becomes a permanent lifestyle or a core philosophy.
Okay.
It challenges you to ask a very uncomfortable question. Is your permanent retreat actually protecting your peace? Or is it simply an evasion of duty disguised as enlightenment?
Wow. An evasion of duty disguised as enlightenment, that's heavy.
It is. Because sometimes rejecting the world isn't piety, and it isn't self-care. It is a trauma response. It's a defense mechanism deployed against the overwhelming, terrifying stress of taking on meaningful responsibility.
So it's actually fear.
Yes. The framework explicitly states that we are not meant to follow a religion of suffering, nor are we meant to follow a religion of cowardice and avoidance. True mental resilience, true psychological fortitude is not developed by hiding in a cabin from the snake.
It's developed by learning the precise protocols to handle the snake to extract the antivenom.
Exactly. If you isolate yourself in the woods, you might successfully protect your own delicate, curated peace. But who is out there in the radiation zone establishing justice? Who is pushing back against the corruption?
So extreme asceticism, or this modern flavor of therapeutic apathy, is actually deeply self-centered.
Good believe.
You are keeping your hands perfectly clean while the world burns around you. You're refusing to put on the hazmat suit to go fix the failing nuclear reactor because you're terrified of getting a little radiation exposure.
Yeah.
You would rather let the city go dark than risk your own comfort.
Precisely. And this is a massive paradigm shift. If the goal isn't to pathologically hoard the wealth, and the goal isn't to run away and hide from the wealth, well, what are the actual instructions for handling the radioactive material?
Which brings us to our third major section, the redemption of ambition. Because if you have to handle the uranium, you better have a transcendent reason for putting on the suit.
You really do.
And the lecture provides two epic historical case studies to illustrate what purpose-driven wealth looks like in practice. The first is the story of Dhul-Qarnayn.
Dhul-Qarnayn represents a fascinating archetype.
Mm-hmm.
The righteous conqueror, the builder who operates on a massive scale.
Right. And the text highlights that God gave him immense resources, logistical capabilities, and power. But look at his behavior. He didn't build an impenetrable palace and sit inside counting his gold reserves.
He mobilized, he used his resources to gather more resources, constantly expanding his reach.
He goes on these massive, grueling expeditions. The lecture describes him traveling to the ends of the earth, pushing into murky, swampy, unexplored territories where the local populations don't even speak a recognizable language.
And Khan uses this brilliant, relatable analogy here.
Yeah. He compares it to venturing into the mosquito-infested swamps of Orlando before Disney World was built.
That's such a good image.
Like, why are you willingly going into the humid, miserable darkness to deal with alligators? What is the psychological drive to push into the grime of the world when you could be comfortable at home?
Well, the drive was not vanity. And it was not the psychopathology of accumulation. The expansion had a massive, stabilizing external purpose.
It's establishing justice.
Yes.
Right.
Wherever Dhul-Qarnayn went, his mandate was to establish justice. He used his wealth, his military power, and his engineering knowledge to stop systemic corruption. If he encountered an oppressor, he neutralized the threat.
And if he found a vulnerable population, he didn't just give them a pep talk, right?
No, he used his immense resources to mine iron, melt copper, and build a literal physical wall to protect them from the destructive, chaotic forces of Ya'juj and Ma'juj.
So he used the radioactive material to power the grid and build the defense systems. He didn't hoard the iron to measure his net worth. He smelted it down to build a shield for people who couldn't protect themselves.
Exactly. And there's a deeply nuanced psychological lesson embedded in his story about recognizing the limits of your own agency, which, by the way, is vital for preventing burnout.
Oh, this is important. Tell me about that.
The lecture points out that when Dhul-Qarnayn encountered a society where the communication barrier was insurmountable or where he could not practically enact change, he accepted reality.
He didn't force it.
He left them as they were and moved his resources to an area where he could be effective. He did not suffer from a neurotic savior complex that demanded he fix every single anomaly on the planet. He focused his immense ambition strictly where it could practically establish justice.
Because ambition without boundaries or practical application is just neurosis. It's just spinning your wheels.
Exactly.
But then the lecture moves to the second example, and this one is an absolute masterclass in deconstructing bad theology. It's the story of Prophet Sulaiman, or Solomon, and his horses. And this is where Khan totally dismantles a historically terrible misinterpretation of the text.
Oh, the weak interpretation regarding Suleiman's horses. Deconstructing this is so crucial for understanding healthy ambition.
Right. So this weak interpretation, which unfortunately gained traction over time, goes like this. Suleiman is inspecting his magnificent, incredibly valuable cavalry of war horses. He gets so distracted admiring his wealth and the sheer beauty of the animals that he accidentally misses his late afternoon prayer. He misses Maghrib, or Asr.
And then what supposedly happens?
Well, when he realizes he missed his prayer, he's overcome with such intense spiritual regret and rage at the horses for distracting him that he draws his sword and violently hacks off their legs and necks. He slaughters his own cavalry as an act of extreme repentance.
It is a grotesque, irrational interpretation. And the lecture tears it apart using basic logic and an understanding of prophetic psychology.
I mean, it is completely absurd. Khan points out how fundamentally against the core tenets of the religion this action would be. The Prophet Muhammad specifically and unequivocally forbade the mutilation of animals. You do not torture innocent creatures because you made a scheduling error.
The analogy he uses to debunk this is perfect.
Yeah. Imagine a highly trained, deeply religious pediatric surgeon. He's performing a complex 12-hour life-saving surgery on a child. The surgery goes long, and he misses his prayer window.
Does he go home, fly into a rage, and start beating his own children because he missed his prayer?
Of course not. Like, I missed my prayer, so now I'm going to commit a heinous, violent crime against an innocent creature. It violates every principle of justice and sanity.
But the psychology behind why that weak interpretation ever survived in the first place is exactly what we diagnosed earlier.
Wait, really?
Yes, it's a symptom of the extreme ascetic disorder.
Ah.
People who are terrified of the material world, who view Dunya as an omnipresent threat, project their own neuroses onto the text.
No, I see.
They assume that because the massive cavalry represents extreme wealth, military might, and worldly power, the horses must be inherently dangerous to the soul. Therefore, aggressively destroying that wealth must be the ultimate act of piety.
They read their own pathology into the scripture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They operate on the Dunya's nothing operating system, so hacking up a multi-million-dollar military asset is viewed as a spiritual flex.
It's madness. But the lecture corrects this by exploring the true linguistic root of the Arabic word used in the text, mash.
Yes, the word mash. The explanation clarifies that mash does not mean to hack, slaughter, or amputate. It means to gently wipe or stroke.
It's the exact same root used for the action you perform during ablution or wudu, when you wipe over your head or your arms.
And you certainly don't amputate your own arms to purify yourself for prayer.
Right. So Sulaiman was not slaughtering his horses in a fit of pious rage.
Not at all. He was lovingly stroking their necks and legs. He was acting like a master horseman, a general deeply invested in the well-being of his cavalry. He had trained them to run until they disappeared over the horizon, and he was inspecting them with pride and care.
But the key question here is, why did he have all these horses in the first place? Was it a vanity project? Was it the ancient equivalent of buying a fleet of supercars just to post them on social media? The lecture connects this massive accumulation of wealth to a direct divine command. They were commanded to gather strength in horses, to prepare a deterrent, to build an economy.
Because you cannot simply wish a world-class cavalry into existence.
No. You need capital to purchase the finest breeds. You need vast tracts of land for them to train on. You need agricultural infrastructure to grow the feed. You need to hire master blacksmiths to forge the armor and shoes. You need expert trainers and veterinarians.
You have to build a massive, interconnected, highly functioning economic engine.
And Sulaiman was doing all of this not to hoard the wealth in a vault, but to fulfill a higher systemic mission of establishing justice and deterring oppression in his era.
And this completely and utterly redeems the concept of ambition. When your ambition ends with your own ego, like working 80 hours a week just to buy the third sports car to prove to your neighbors that you have arrived.
That is psychopathology.
That is the disease of accumulation. You're drinking the snake venom.
Yeah.
But when your ambition is directed toward building a cavalry, creating a robust infrastructure, employing people, developing resources to protect the vulnerable, and establishing good in society.
That is one of the highest forms of spiritual practice.
You are synthesizing the anti-venom.
And this poses a massive question for you, the listener. It forces you to audit your career, your business, your unique skill set. Look at what you do for 40 to 60 hours a week. Are you just hoarding gold coins like a dragon in a cave, perpetually terrified someone will take them? Or are you actively building a cavalry?
Because having a massive, selfless why fundamentally alters the neurochemical burden of work.
How so?
If you're grinding 80 hours a week purely to buy a Rolex or hit an arbitrary net worth number, your dopamine circuits will eventually try, you will burn out, and you will hate your life. But if you are working 80 hours a week to build an infrastructure that stops corruption, or engineers a medical breakthrough, or lifts your immediate community out of systemic poverty, that exact same 80 hours feels entirely different to your nervous system.
The fatigue is still there, but the existential dread is gone.
It alters the psychological reality of the effort. The friction of the work doesn't magically disappear, but the suffering associated with that friction is transmuted into profound purpose. It takes the radioactive heat of the corporate world and turns it into electricity.
Wow. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most immediately applicable psychological mechanism discussed in the lecture, because we've covered the macro level stuff, right? We debunked the disease of accumulation, we dismantled the urge to run away and hide in a cabin, and we redeemed the concept of massive ambition.
Right.
But how does building a historical cavalry help me on a random Tuesday when I'm stuck in gridlock traffic, my boss is micromanaging me, and I feel like I'm having a panic attack over an unread email?
To address the micro-anxieties of daily life, the lecture introduces a profoundly elegant psychological concept, the dynamic of the expanding versus the shrinking world.
Break this down, because this is the absolute core stress management takeaway of the entire discussion.
Imagine your consciousness, your perception of reality as a camera lens. When your psychological world shrinks, the lens zooms in incredibly tight. It becomes claustrophobic.
Okay, so it zooms in on what?
It focuses entirely on you. Your immediate physical comfort, your immediate emotional desires, your immediate interpersonal grievances. When your world is that small, you only possess the cognitive capacity to think about microscopic problems and microscopic solutions.
Wow.
And the lecture utilizes a very chilling diagnostic phrase from the Quran. Have you seen the one who made his own desires his God?
Made his own desires his God. That is the ultimate terrifying definition of a shrinking world.
Yes. You unwittingly elevate yourself to the status of a deity within your own mind. Your subjective feelings become the absolute, unquestionable dictator of your reality. And when you sit at the dead center of the universe, every minor inconvenience registers as a cosmic insult.
Like if your coffee order is wrong, it's a tragedy that ruins your morning.
Exactly. If someone cuts you off in traffic, it's not a spatial error, it's a deeply personal existential threat. The shrinking world is the primary engine of modern anxiety. It is hyper-individualism taken to its most neurotic, biologically inflamed extreme.
But I need to pause here, because this directly contradicts almost every modern self-help book currently in print.
Oh, it completely upends it.
Right. Because
Mhm.
modern pop psychology, the kind that dominates TikTok and Instagram therapy accounts, tells us to do exactly this. It instructs us to aggressively focus inward.
Center yourself.
Yeah, we are told to relentlessly curate our physical and emotional space, to center our own feelings above all else, to live our truth, and to basically establish our emotional comfort as the highest moral priority in our lives.
And setting boundaries has morphed into building walls against any minor discomfort.
Exactly. But this framework is arguing the exact opposite. It's suggesting that hyper-focusing on your own feelings is basically constructing a false idol out of your desires, and that very process of self-obsession is what is causing the panic attacks.
It is a devastating systemic critique of toxic self-care. The argument here is that the ultimate cure for self-obsessed anxiety cannot be more self-obsession. You cannot cure the neurosis by staring deeper into your own navel. The cure for a hyperinflamed sense of self is self-transcendence.
Self-transcendence, forcing the lens to zoom out.
Exactly. When your world expands, the claustrophobic lens pulls back. You begin to focus on global realities, systemic solutions, and higher transcendent purposes. You look at the very real structural struggles of humanity.
You internalize the mandate to establish justice on a societal level.
You contemplate the vastness of the universe and your actual proportional responsibility to your creator and your fellow human beings. You realize you're a single node in a massive interconnected network.
And the psychological byproduct of maintaining that incredibly broad horizon is a state the text refers to as beautiful patience.
Beautiful patience. It's crucial to understand that this is not a passive, gritting your teeth, suppressed anger kind of patience.
Right, it's not just white-knuckling through the annoyance.
No, it is the patience born entirely of perspective. The lecture references the advice given to the prophet. People will say terrible, slanderous things, but you must maintain beautiful patience because your ultimate objective is simply too massive to be derailed by their petty insults.
It's an issue of bandwidth. Like if you are actively mobilizing resources to build a literal iron wall to protect a vulnerable civilization from Gog and Magog, you mathematically do not have the time, the energy, or the emotional bandwidth to care if someone left a snarky comment on your social media post.
You literally do not have the caloric energy to be triggered by a coworker's passive-aggressive email about a spreadsheet.
Your horizon is so incredibly broad, and the stakes of your mission are so high that the petty microscopic dramas of daily life just bounce off your armor. They fail to register on the radar.
And that is the ultimate impenetrable armor against modern anxiety. When your internal world is massive, a traffic jam is just a tiny, insignificant blip. It's a moment to listen to an audiobook.
But when your internal world is the size of a shoebox and you are the only entity existing inside it, that traffic jam takes up 100% of your available reality.
Expanding your worldview isn't just a lofty moral ideal. It is a vital biological defense mechanism for your nervous system. It naturally right-sizes your problems.
That completely flips the modern therapeutic script. We do not cure our anxiety by attempting to shrink our lives down to a perfectly curated, risk-free, manageable size. We cure our anxiety by expanding our purpose and our responsibilities to such a massive scale that the daily anxieties become mathematically insignificant.
Precisely. You don't defeat the petty stresses by going to war with them directly. You render them entirely irrelevant by adopting a magnificent world-altering responsibility.
Man, we have covered incredible, challenging ground today. Let's trace the arc of this discussion really quick. We started in the dark, confronting the deeply uncomfortable truth that society continuously attempts to force us to outsource our inherent human value to inanimate currencies. Fiat money, follower counts, prestige titles.
And we looked at how the relentless pursuit of accumulation isn't success. It is a literal psychopathology, a behavioral addiction that hijacks our dopamine circuits, leaves us profoundly isolated, and keeps us forever starved on a hedonic treadmill.
From there, we explored the trap of the opposite extreme, the ascetic impulse to reject the material world entirely out of fear. We established that the wealth and power of the Dunya is akin to radioactive material or snake venom. Incredibly volatile and dangerous, yes, but absolutely essential.
You do not run from the uranium. You handle it with strict discipline protocols like daily prayer and charity to extract the power and synthesize the anti-venom.
Retreating to a cabin to protect your peace is often just a trauma response masking an evasion of duty, which brought us to the redemption of ambition. Through the historical templates of Dhul-Qarnayn expanding into the unknown to build protective walls, and Prophet Sulaiman cultivating his massive economic cavalry.
We learn that ambition is only a disease when it terminates at your own ego. When you are building a powerful economic engine to establish justice, protect the vulnerable, and help humanity, ambition transforms into a sacred, necessary duty.
And finally, we uncovered the counterintuitive antidote to our daily suffocating anxieties. We recognize that hyperfixating on our own emotional state shrinks our world, turning us into fragile, neurotic deities worshiping our own desires.
The true path to neurological peace, that beautiful patience, is only accessed by forcibly expanding our worldview and shouldering a massive transcendent purpose that dwarfs our daily stresses.
So, to you, the listener, the next time you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, the next time you are overwhelmed by comparing your messy, behind-the-scenes reality to someone else's perfectly curated highlight reel, or the next time you find yourself spiraling into a panic over some petty, insignificant drama at work,
Force yourself to pause.
audit your state. Ask yourself, has my world just shrunk too small? Am I sitting in a shoebox right now? Am I actively worshiping the ghost of an inanimate object?
It requires intense, constant vigilance. Pushing the horizon back out is a deliberate, daily psychological practice.
It is the work of a lifetime. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. It's something hovering beneath everything we've discussed, and I want you to really mull this over tonight.
Okay, what is it?
If hoarding wealth makes you a miserable slave to a dead object, and rejecting the world entirely makes you an apathetic coward hiding from reality, what is the radioactive responsibility that you are actively avoiding right now out of fear? What is the hard, messy, complicated, terrifying thing you are refusing to touch that could actually be the exact massive responsibility required to cure your modern anxiety?
Confronting that question is what actually changes a life.
Keep expanding your world. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.